A music teacher once made a teenage boy stand in front of his entire class and systematically explained every reason why he would fail at music. She told him to give up. She told him he was wasting everyone's time. She told him he didn't have what it takes. That boy was Elvis Presley. And what happened next didn't just prove her wrong. It forced her to completely change how she taught music for the rest of her career. But here's the part nobody talks about. Years later, when Elvis was the biggest star on the planet, he went back to that classroom. He stood in the exact same spot where she'd humiliated him. And what he said to her, that's the part that still gives me chills. Stay with me on this one. And hey, if you're the kind of person who loves stories about people who prove the doubters wrong, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now. I share stories like this every week, stories about underdogs who changed the world. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. All right, let's set the scene. It's October 1949, Hums High School in Memphis, Tennessee. And there's this kid sitting in the back row of music class trying his absolute hardest to be invisible. His name is Elvis Aaron Presley. He's 14 years old, and honestly, life hasn't been particularly kind to him so far. See, Elvis wasn't one of the popular kids, not even close. His family was poor, like genuinely struggling poor. They'd moved to Memphis from Tupelo, Mississippi, living in public housing at Lauderdale Courts. His clothes were worn and outdated. He had this slick back hair that the other kids thought was weird, and he had a way about him that just didn't fit in with everyone else. So Elvis had developed a survival strategy for school. Sit in the back, keep your head down, don't make eye contact, don't draw attention to yourself. Just get through the day without anyone noticing you. That strategy was about to fail spectacularly. The music teacher at Hums was a woman named Mrs. Catherine Gilmore. Now, Mrs. Gilmore had been teaching music for nearly 2 decades by this point. She was old school in every sense of the word: classical training, proper technique, traditional standards. She believed music was a discipline, something you learned through rules and structure and correct methodology. She could spot what she considered real talent from a mile away. And she had zero patience for students who thought they could just wing it, who thought feeling the music was enough without understanding the theory behind it. A few weeks before our main story, Elvis had made what turned out to be a critical mistake. Mrs. Gilmore asked the class if anyone played an instrument, and Elvis, probably hoping to contribute something positive for once, raised his hand and mentioned that he played guitar and sang a little. Big mistake. In Mrs. Gilmore's experience, teenage boys who played guitar were usually just trying to impress girls. They rarely had any real musical substance, and she mentally filed Elvis away as someone who needed to be corrected. So here we are, that Tuesday morning in October. Elvis is sitting in the back row, minding his own business, hoping the clock will move faster so he can get out of there. And then he hears it. Mr. Presley. Mrs. Gilmore's voice cuts through the classroom like a knife. Sharp, commanding, the kind of voice that doesn't ask twice. I'd like you to come to the front of the class, please. Now imagine being 14 years old. Imagine being the kid everyone already makes fun of. Imagine that sinking feeling in your stomach when you realize you've been singled out and you have no idea why. Elvis stood up, 30 pairs of eyes swiveled to watch him. He could already hear the snickers starting. Being called to the front by Mrs. Gilmore was never, ever a good thing. He walked to the front of the room, his old, worn-out shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor with every step. His face was already burning red. And then Mrs. Gilmore started talking. Class, I want to use Mr. Presley here as an example of something we've been discussing: the difference between genuine musical talent and mere enthusiasm. Can you imagine hearing that as a teenager? Standing in front of all your classmates while your teacher essentially announces that she's about to use you as a case study in failure. It gets worse. Mrs. Gilmore reminded the class that Elvis had claimed to play guitar and sing. She'd apparently asked him to bring his guitar to class for a demonstration. But here's the thing, Elvis couldn't bring his guitar. His family had been forced to pawn it the month before just to keep the electricity on. When Mrs. Gilmore saw he didn't have the guitar, her response was dripping with sarcasm. How convenient. She then told him that since he couldn't demonstrate with guitar, he could sing a cappella instead. After all, he'd mentioned performing at local venues. Surely he could sing without accompaniment. The trap was set. Elvis wanted to disappear. He wanted to run out of that classroom and never come back. But what choice did he have? 30 kids were starring. Mrs. Gilmore was waiting. Refusing would only make things worse. I don't know what to sing, ma'am, Elvis mumbled. Anything you'd like, Mr. Presley, whatever you think showcases your talent. The way she said talent made it crystal clear she didn't think he had any. So there's Elvis, standing alone at the front of the classroom, hands shaking, throat tight with nerves. He could hear kids giggling behind him. He could feel Mrs. Gilmore's judgmental stare burning into him. But Elvis had been singing his whole life. It was one of the few things that made him feel like he was worth something, so he closed his eyes and started to sing. He chose Old Shep, a song his mama loved. It's this emotional country ballad about a boy and his dog, heavy on feeling, heavy on heart. At first, Elvis's voice came out shaky, nervous, uncertain, but then something happened, something that would become legendary in its own right. Elvis forgot where he was. When Elvis sang, truly sang, everything else faded away. The classroom, the snickering kids, Mrs. Gilmore, all of it dissolved and there was just the music. His voice found its natural register, that unique blend of country and blues and gospel that would eventually change music forever. He poured everything he had into that song, singing about loss and love with the kind of raw emotional intensity that can't be taught. When he finished, the classroom was completely silent. For one brief moment, Elvis thought maybe he'd done it. Maybe he'd shown them something real. Maybe Mrs. Gilmore would finally see past the worn-out clothes and the slicked-back hair and recognize that this kid had something special. Then Mrs. Gilmore started clapping. Slowly, sarcastically, the kind of applause that mocks rather than celebrates. A few students nervously joined in, not sure what else to do. "Thank you, Mr. Presley, for that interesting demonstration," Mrs. Gilmore said. "Class, I want you to pay attention now because Mr. Presley has just shown us several critical mistakes that aspiring singers make." And then she proceeded to systematically tear Elvis apart. She walked around him like he was a specimen under examination, pointing out everything she considered wrong. No proper vocal technique, no breath support, no attention to pitch accuracy. Excessive emotional display because apparently in professional music, we control our emotions rather than letting them control us. And then she delivered what she clearly considered the killing blow: stylistic confusion. Is this country? Is this blues? Mr. Presley seems unable to commit to a single genre, which shows a fundamental lack of understanding about how music works. Each criticism landed like a physical blow. Elvis kept his eyes fixed on the floor, blinking back tears, trying desperately not to cry in front of everyone. But Mrs. Gilmore wasn't done. She stepped directly in front of Elvis and looked him straight in the eyes. "Mr. Presley, I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. I've been teaching music for 18 years. I've seen hundreds of students come through these doors. Some have genuine talent, most don't." She paused. "You, unfortunately, fall into the second category." The classroom had gone completely quiet. Even the kids who usually laughed at everything seemed uncomfortable with how brutal this had become. Mrs. Gilmore continued, her voice certain and absolute. "You have enthusiasm, I'll grant you that, but enthusiasm isn't talent. Playing guitar at local venues for tips isn't a career. It's a hobby at best, a delusion at worst." She listed his failures one by one: untrained voice, confused style, non-existent understanding of music theory. "My advice to you is to give up on this music fantasy now, before you waste years of your life chasing something you'll never achieve." And then she said the words that would echo in Elvis's head for years to come. "You will never be a professional singer, you don't have what it takes. The sooner you accept that, the better off you'll be." Mrs. Gilmore turned back to the class, using Elvis as a living lesson in failure. "Mr. Presley has done us a service today by demonstrating what not to do. Raw emotion without technical skill is just noise. Mixing genres without understanding them is just confusion. And confidence without competence is just arrogance." She looked back at Elvis one final time. "You may sit down now, Mr. Presley, and please stop wasting everyone's time with these musical pretensions." Elvis walked back to his desk feeling like he'd been physically beaten. None of the other students would look at him. The silence was somehow worse than the laughter would have been. He sat down and stared at his desk for the rest of class, not hearing another word Mrs. Gilmore said. Just those words playing over and over. "You will never be a professional singer, you don't have what it takes." After class ended, Elvis didn't go to his next period. He couldn't. He walked out of school, caught the city bus, and rode all the way home to Lauderdale Courts. His mama, Gladys, was doing laundry when he walked in. One look at his face and she dropped everything. "Baby, what happened? Why aren't you in school?" Elvis tried to hold it together. He wanted to be tough, to shake it off like it didn't matter. But the moment his mama asked, everything came flooding out. The whole story: Mrs. Gilmore, the singing in front of class, being told he'd never make it, being used as an example of what not to do. Gladys listened to every word, her expression getting harder and angrier with each detail. When Elvis finished, she grabbed her coat. "Come on, we're going back to that school." "Mama's no." "Elvis Aaron Presley, no teacher is going to talk to my son that way, not while I'm breathing." They took the bus back to Hums. Gladys marched straight into the principal's office with Elvis following behind, embarrassed but secretly grateful that someone was fighting for him. The principal, Mr. Robert Cole, listened to Gladys's account of what happened. He promised to speak with Mrs. Gilmore about her teaching methods. But he also gently suggested that perhaps Elvis was being overly sensitive, that constructive criticism was simply part of education. Gladys wasn't having it. "That wasn't constructive criticism," she said, her voice shaking with controlled fury. "That was humiliation. That was a teacher using her position to crush a child's dreams in front of his peers, and I won't stand for it." Walking home afterward, Gladys put her arm around Elvis and said something he would never forget. "Baby, I want you to listen to me real careful. That woman doesn't know what she's talking about." "Mama, she's been teaching music for 18 years. She knows more than." "She knows how to teach kids to sing like robots," Gladys interrupted. "She knows how to make them follow rules and fit into boxes, but you know what she doesn't know? The best music in the world comes from people who don't fit in boxes. Feeling is more important than technique, and she sure as hell doesn't know my son." Elvis wanted to believe her, but Mrs. Gilmore's words were still ringing in his ears. Gladys stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "You know what you're going to do? You're going to prove her wrong. Every time you sing, every time you perform, every time someone tells you you're good, you're going to remember what that bitter woman said, and you're going to use it as fuel." That night, Elvis couldn't sleep. Mrs. Gilmore's criticisms played on repeat in his head, but so did his mama's words, "use it as fuel." The next day at school, Elvis passed Mrs. Gilmore in the hallway. She didn't even look at him. To her, he was already forgotten, just another failed student, another example of misplaced ambition. But Elvis looked at her, and in that moment he made a silent promise to himself. One day he would make her remember him. One day she would know his name. Elvis started performing more after that. Every local venue that would have him, every radio amateur contest, every talent show. He sang with more intensity, more passion, more determination than ever before. And every single time someone told him he was good, every time someone requested another song, every time someone threw money in his guitar case, Elvis thought about Mrs. Gilmore. "See, you were wrong." Fast forward to 1954. A young Elvis Presley walks into Sun Records in Memphis and records a song called "That's All Right." When it started playing on local radio, one of the first things Elvis thought about was Mrs. Gilmore. He wondered if she'd heard it. He wondered if she recognized his voice. By 1955, Elvis was playing sold-out shows across the South. By 1956, he was the biggest star in America, appearing on The Ed Sullivan Show, selling millions of records, causing teenagers across the country to lose their minds. By 1957, Elvis Presley wasn't just famous. He was a global phenomenon. The kid who was told he'd never make it, he was literally changing the face of popular music. In March 1957, Elvis returned to Memphis for a charity concert. The local newspaper ran a big feature about their hometown hero, mentioning that he'd graduated from Hums High School. The article quoted several former teachers, all eager to claim they'd recognized his talent early on. Everyone wanted a piece of Elvis's success story. Catherine Gilmore was not among those quoted. But she read that article. She sat in her kitchen, staring at a photograph of Elvis performing in front of thousands of screaming fans. And for the first time in her teaching career, she felt something she'd never experienced before. The sickening realization that she had been completely, devastatingly wrong. A few weeks later, Mrs. Gilmore did something unprecedented. She wrote Elvis a letter. She sent it to his management company, not really expecting it would ever reach him. In the letter, she apologized. She explained that she'd been teaching the same rigid way for so long that she couldn't recognize talent that didn't fit her narrow definition. She admitted that watching him succeed had taught her more about music than 18 years of teaching ever had. She asked if he could ever forgive her. Elvis received the letter while on tour. His manager assumed he'd toss it in the trash, just another piece of mail from his past. Instead, Elvis read it 3 times. Then he carefully folded it and put it in his wallet. When Elvis returned to Memphis about a month later, he did something completely unexpected. He went back to Hums High School and asked to speak with Mrs. Gilmore. She agreed, though she was terrified about what he might say. What do you say to someone whose dreams you tried to crush, only to watch those dreams come true beyond anyone's imagination. They met in the same classroom where everything had happened 8 years earlier. Mrs. Gilmore sat at her desk, looking older and somehow smaller than Elvis remembered. And Elvis stood at the front of the room, the exact same spot where he'd stood as a terrified 14-year-old. "Mrs. Gilmore," Elvis said quietly, "I got your letter." "Mr. Presley, I am so deeply sorry." "Please," Elvis said gently, "let me finish." Mrs. Gilmore fell silent. "I wanted to thank you." She looked shocked. "Thank me?" "Yes, ma'am, what you did that day, it hurt. It hurt bad. I went home thinking maybe you were right, maybe I should give up." Elvis paused. "But then I realized something. You gave me a choice. I could believe you or I could prove you wrong. And choosing to prove you wrong made me work harder than I ever would have otherwise." He smiled that famous Elvis smile. "Every time I wanted to quit, every time someone rejected me, I thought about you telling me I'd never make it. And I thought, watch me." Mrs. Gilmore had tears streaming down her face. "I was wrong about you, about everything." "You weren't all wrong," Elvis replied. "I didn't have technical training. I was mixing genres in ways that didn't make sense by traditional standards. I was singing with too much emotion and not enough control. All of that was true." He paused and looked around the classroom, the same desks, the same windows, the same everything. "You just didn't understand that those things weren't flaws. They were what made me different." Elvis sat down in one of the student desks. "You know what I learned from that day, Mrs. Gilmore? I learned that the people who tell you that you can't do something are usually people who don't understand what you're trying to do. They're not evil. They're just limited by their own understanding." Mrs. Gilmore nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "I've changed how I teach because of you. I tell my students now that there are many ways to make music, not just the way I was taught." "Then something good came from it," Elvis said. He stood up to leave, then turned back one more time. "Mrs. Gilmore, you want to know the honest truth. That day in class was one of the best things that ever happened to me." She looked at him, confused. "Not because you were right, you weren't," Elvis explained, "but because it taught me that I could either let other people's opinions define me or I could define myself." He smiled. "I chose to define myself." "I'm glad you did," Mrs. Gilmore said softly. "Me too," Elvis replied, "me too." The story of Mrs. Gilmore and Elvis became legendary in Memphis teaching circles. She told it to every new class of music students for the rest of her career. It became her cautionary tale, a lesson about the danger of being too rigid in your definitions of what talent looks like. "I once had a student who didn't fit any of my categories," she would tell her classes. "He mixed genres I thought should never be mixed. He sang with emotion I thought was excessive. He had a style I thought was completely wrong." She'd pause for effect. "His name was Elvis Presley, and he taught me that the best artists are often the ones who break all the rules I thought mattered." Catherine Gilmore taught for another 12 years after that meeting with Elvis. She completely transformed her teaching style, encouraging students to find their own unique voices rather than forcing them into traditional molds. She became known for nurturing unconventional talent, the complete opposite of who she'd been before. She never forgot the lesson Elvis taught her, that sometimes the students we think will fail are actually the ones who will change the world. And Elvis, he kept Mrs. Gilmore's apology letter in his wallet until the day he died. Not as a trophy, not as proof that he'd won, but as a reminder that even the people who hurt us can learn and grow, and that forgiveness is more powerful than revenge. So what's the real lesson here? A music teacher made Elvis Presley stand in front of his class and told him he would never make it. She listed every reason why he would fail. She tried to crush his dreams before they could even take flight. And Elvis could have believed her. A lot of people would have. After all, she was the expert. She'd been teaching for 18 years. She had all the credentials, all the authority. But Elvis chose differently. He took her criticism and turned it into rocket fuel. Every time doubt crept in, he remembered her words and he pushed harder. He didn't just prove her wrong. He redefined what American music could sound like. And when he finally made it, when he became the biggest star in the world, he didn't gloat. He didn't seek revenge. He showed grace. He helped her become a better teacher. That might be the most legendary thing of all. If this story resonated with you, I want to hear from you in the comments. Has a teacher, a boss, a family member, anyone ever told you that you couldn't achieve something? Did you prove them wrong? Drop your story below. I read every single comment, and I know the community here would love to hear what you've overcome. If you're new here, make sure to hit subscribe and that notification bell. I share stories like this every week, stories about people who refuse to accept other people's limitations. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, someone who's being told they can't make it, someone who needs a reminder that the doubters don't get to write their story. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next one.